Alright, this is a continuation of the previous video, ratios and proportions, number 14. And question 1. A pine tree measured 4.5 feet tall. Over the next 7.5 years, it grew to a height of 57 feet. During the 7.5 years, what was the average yearly growth rate of the height of the tree? Now, if we think about this question in using simpler numbers, so for example, if the tree was 60 inches tall and it grew to a height of 64 inches in 2 years, then that means for both of those years it grew 2 inches. If it grew 4 inches in 4 years, we could assume that it grew 1 inch per year, right? So basically, we're really finding the unit rate between the feet, or how much it grew, and for 1 year. All right, so let's highlight some key information in the problem. So the pine tree measures 4.5 feet tall, so it's starting at 4.5 feet tall. Over the next 7.5 years, it grew to a height of 57 feet. Right? During the 7.5 years, what was the average yearly growth of the height of the tree? All right, so once again, if we started at 60 inches and ended at 64, that means it grew 4 inches, right? And we could find that by doing 64 minus 60, which is 4 inches. In this case, we're starting at 40.5 or 40.5, and we're ending at 57. So we could find how much it grew over those years by doing 57 minus 40.5 feet tall. Now, if we had a decimal, that would be or a fraction rather, that would be a non-terminating decimal. I would have to leave it as a fraction. But halves are generally easy to work with, so I'm going to convert it into a decimal and write it as 40.5. So 57 minus 40.5, that's going to give me 16.5 feet. And this is how much it grew in 7.5 years. All right, so 7.5 feet in 7.5 years. And if we go back to that scenario that we were talking about, so we have 4 inches, right? You went from 60 inches to 64 inches. 4 inches in 2 years means 2 inches in 1 year. All right, so let's write this as a ratio. So we have 16.5 feet in 7.5 years. All right. Now, to find the unit rate, you simply have to divide by 7.5. And this gives us 16.5 divided by 7.5. That's 2.2 feet. And the bottom we have 1 year. All right, so this means that the tree grew approximately 2.2 feet per year. All right, and if you don't want to use the unit rate, you could simply make a proportion. So for example, you would start with the same ratio, 16.5 feet over 7.5 years. And this would equal, well, how much feet in 1 year? Right? And if you solve this proportion, you would get the same answer that we have over here and up here. All right, moving on to question 2. A recipe requires 1/3 cup of flour for each 1/5 cup. Sorry, a recipe requires 1/3 cup of water for each 1/5 cup of flour. How many cups of water are needed for each cup of flour? All right, highlight key information. So 1/3 cup of water for each cup of flour. How many cups of water are needed for each cup of flour? All right, so some of the key numbers that we have here are 1/3 cups of water and 1/5 cups of flour. All right, and if you recall when we did scaling and proportions in RP2, the way to set up a proportion is what you know, and we're going to set it equal to what we want to know, or we could even look at it as some kind of a scenario. All right, and what we know is 1/3 cups of water for each cup of flour. Now we could write that as a ratio, which is 1/3 water and 1/5 flour. All right. I could also start with 1/5 flour over 1/3 water. That would just mean my scenario would be flipped as well. All right, and this is going to be equal to some kind of scenario, and that's usually found in the question. So the question says, how many cups of water are needed for each cup of flour? Well, each would imply that we're talking about 1 cup of flour. And how many cups of water means X water. All right, so remember we line our units up, so X water is going to be up here. And 1 flour is up here. All right. So we're good to go in our proportion. A lot of you during class noticed that this is just a unit rate question. We could divide the numerator and denominator by 1/5, and we would get the same answer. If we continue our proportion, you would cross multiply. So you have 1/5 times X equals 1/3 times 1. Okay? 1/5 times X is the same thing. 1/3 times 1 is 1/3. Now you need to divide by the coefficient. This is going to divide to 1. And we're left with X equals, over here we have 1/3 divided by 1/5. Take that to the side of your paper. 1/3 divided by 1/5. We have to multiply by the reciprocal, and that's going to give us 5/3. All right, so X equals 5/3 cups of water. All right, so 5/3, or we could simply write it as 1 and 2/3. All right, either answer would be okay. I'm going to leave my answer like this. All right, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next videos.